Hey everybody! A word from one of our favorite sponsors, Sunset Lake Sebede.com. You can use the code LEFTISBEST for 20% off their incredible products. Their tinctures with melatonin and their gummies with melatonin are basically my go-to every night. It helps me sleep, helps me get ready for the show in the morning and not be, tossing and turning, thinking about the world as sometimes I tend to do. Sunset Lake actually gets me relaxed, but I don't have to be high or anything like that. Although if you want to be, you can get some of their gummies with a little THC in it, which every time Sam says that, he knows it's going to make me laugh. But they have smalls that you can grind up and put in with your other greenery that you may be smoking. They have keef. They have pre-rolls, which if you want to relax a little bit. The gummies taste great. The fudge tastes almost too good. Sunset Lake is an ethical company. They have great products. And I'm telling you, there's a Sebede ad on every corner here in New York. And a lot of it is just crap. This is not the case with Sunset Lake. You can feel the difference. It's ethically sourced. They're a great movement partner. They contribute to strike funds. We've done fundraisers with them for Planned Parenthood and for criminal justice reform. Sunset Lake is a company you can be a customer of and feel really good about it. So go to sunsetlakesebede.com. Use the code LEFTISBEST for 20% off. Again, Sunset Lake then.com. Use the code LEFTISBEST for 20% off. And now for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, April 26th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Owen Jones will be with us. From the UK, we'll be talking about Palestine, I'm sure, our respective governments, and also immigration crackdowns in the UK. And later in the show, comedian Kate Willett will be with us to talk about her new special, Loopholes. Also on the show, police use rubber bullets, tear gas, and physical force on students and faculty at Emory University in Georgia, protesting to divest from Israel and for Cop City to cease. Hundreds more arrested around the country, from Ohio State to Indiana University to University of Minnesota, protesting for Palestine. USC canceled its graduation ceremony in response, after also silencing their valedictorian because she may speak in favor of Palestine. She had a minor in genocide studies. Might want to feature that academia, huh? Guess
Shameful.
not. So that obviously inefficient pier being delivered or being built to deliver aid to Gaza, they're just starting to build it. It's been 2 months. Israel was, I think, saying, no, it's gotta be here, it's gotta be here. Delay to kill. And satellite images indicate the worst. Israel's Rafah invasion appears to be imminent. The U.S. threatens sanctions against China for doing arms deals with Russia. Maybe, we could just do a deal, and then we stop arming Israel, they stop arming Russia, and, there you go. Problem solved. Chad orders U.S. troops to withdraw after Niger did the same. Trump's lawyers get to question the National Enquirer's David Pecker today, who testified yesterday about his involvement in catch and kill stories for Trump, including the Karen McDougal story. The FCC votes to restore some net neutrality rules. Good news. The EPA has a new rule requiring coal-powered plants to either capture emissions or shut down. Tennessee's Republican-controlled state house approves legislation that would penalize adults who help minors receive gender-affirming care. And lastly, millions of people across Southeast Asia are experiencing sweltering heat in a heat wave that has already killed dozens and closed schools. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Casual Friday. Sam is back next week, but we're wrapping up the week with another great show for you, where we'll be talking to Owen Jones, whose work I've admired for quite a while, and we've been chatting. It was a great opportunity to get him on the show, and I thought of him when I saw that insane immigration law that the conservatives are trying to implement in the UK. He'll touch on that with me, and we'll go deeper into that, but his work on Gaza has been phenomenal. And then we've noticed it here across the pond.
I'll just point out the irony that, at the founding of Israel, one of the big crimes by the West, in addition to setting up a settler colonial system, was not accepting Jewish refugees.
Yes.
And the entire right wing, including former Israeli diplomats going on Dave Rubin's show to say, actually what America needs to do is harden its borders now to people that are seeking asylum. It's absolutely disgusting and despicable. And, it's the history that we've learned. We're still living in it.
And we had the author on who wrote about border fascism, and I'm forgetting border fascism is a different book. The book we had on more recently was The Case for Open Borders, is what I was thinking of. John Washington.
Great book.
And it's just about how this new frontier of fascism is heavily militarizing our borders, basically to keep people out. And displacement due to climate change is going to just exponentially increase that. So we have to be on high alert for those kinds of politics taking over as a plank of the right.
Yeah, and people who think it's utopian, I've been to the European Union. You can relax borders. The world doesn't end.
Right.
It's
right, but those white people get to cross those borders, right, to go travel. Yep. Anyway, we will talk about that with Owen, and I also want to say, yes, Penny in New Mexico points out, Owen also just joined Mehdi Hassan's Zateo, and we'll hopefully be speaking to Mehdi soon. He's been a hard man to book, but that's a really exciting project he has going on. But let's start here, because some troubling signs coming out of Trump's presidential immunity case in front of the Supreme Court. It was also kind of scary that they even decided to take up the case, because legal experts who are acting in good faith basically universally say, this is crap. No, the president does not have immunity to violate the law.
Or, I was just saying, I didn't make this point, but maybe you could run for president on, I'm going to assassinate the Supreme Court because I get to do what I want.
Right. Well, then they might change their tune on presidential immunity. But he would have no reason to do that right now, because they are really helping Trump out here. So the fact that they took up this case in and of itself meant that oral arguments would have to happen in late April. They happened yesterday. And the Jack Smith's prosecution wouldn't be able to start, delaying it and guaranteeing that this prosecution would not happen before the election, basically. There was still some optimism that maybe they could squeeze it in, but the Supreme Court ended that basically yesterday, because they are making the case, and it looks like they're going to go in this direction, that the concept of presidential immunity needs to be sent back down to the lower courts so they can analyze the election plot and make determinations on whether or not it constitutes official presidential duties or not. And that's essentially what they're arguing here. What acts by the president constitute official acts by the president, and which ones count as personal ones, which seems like a ridiculous distinction, but you have to understand what the Supreme Court's true motives here are. It's to delay this case, delay the prosecution until after the election, so Trump has a shot. There was, as I said, some feelings that, well, maybe, you know, they support the broader Republican project and the conservative regulation of industry and capitalism broadly, and maybe they won't take this case to help Trump out because there are some in the Republican donor class and such that want basically Trump to be out of the party's power structure as soon as possible, and perhaps a second Biden term might be easier for that. But that's not how apparently they appear to be acting, at least in what they're saying in oral arguments. Neil Gorsuch made it clear, and I think Kavanaugh as well, that they're choosing to decide on this in a way that it would apply to future presidents, not just Donald Trump. And they are also seemingly going to make a determination on different kinds of actions and what that means as it relates to presidential immunity. One of the arguments was made here by Sam Alito. He is questioning here Special Counsel Jack Smith's attorney, Michael Dreeben, in oral arguments about presidential immunity.
I'm sure you would agree with me that a stable democratic society requires that a candidate who loses an election, even a close one, even a hotly contested one, leave office peacefully if that candidate is the incumbent.
Of course.
All right. Now, if an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent, will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy? And we can look around the world and find countries where we have seen this process, where the loser gets thrown in jail.
So I think it's exactly the opposite, Justice Alito. There are lawful mechanisms to contest the results in an election. And outside the record, but I think of public knowledge, petitioner and his allies filed dozens of electoral challenges, and my understanding is lost all but one that was not outcome determinative in any respect. There were judges that said in order to sustain substantial claims of fraud that would overturn an election result that's certified by a state, you need evidence, you need proof. And none of those things were manifested. So there is an appropriate way to challenge things through the courts with evidence. If you lose, you accept the results. That has been the nation's experience. I think the court is well familiar with that.
Thank you.
So the argument there, I just want to be clear to people, is that the idea is that presidents who are fearful of criminal prosecution after they leave office would destabilize the country further because of the looming prosecution that would come later. Isn't it exactly the opposite? Shouldn't we want our presidents to behave in a lawful manner and have the threat of being held accountable for breaking the law after leaving office be something that they take into consideration, versus this idea that a president who's worried about who is not worried about future prosecutions basically acting in a way that would be destabilizing? It makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
it's
if
the
you
reverse.
if you don't want to be charged with a crime you commit as the executive of the most powerful leader in the entire world, then don't run to be the most powerful leader in the entire world.
I mean, we're actually seeing this, though, with Donald Trump. He's behaving in a more reckless manner because of these prosecutions. But anyway, I'm so twisted up in knots based on that argument that I don't even know what to say to it. Justice Sotomayor had a more sane take here. Here she is asking Trump's attorney, John Sauer, about whether a president can order a rival of his to be assassinated, and would that still constitute presidential immunity?
Malum in se is a concept long viewed as appropriate in law, that there's some things that are so fundamentally evil that they have to be protected against. Now, I think, and your answer below, I'm going to give you a chance to say if you stay by it. If the president decides that his rival is a corrupt person and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him, is that within his official acts that for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
It could, and why? Because he's doing it for personal reasons. He's not doing it like President Obama is alleged to have done it, to protect the country from a terrorist. He's doing it for personal gain. And isn't that the nature of the allegations here? That he's not doing these acts in furtherance of an official responsibility. He's doing it for personal gain.
I agree with that characterization of the indictment, and that confirms immunity, because the characterization is that there's a series of official acts that were done for an unlawful.
No, because immunity says even if you did it for personal gain, we won't hold you responsible. How could that be?
So she makes a great argument there, and the Republicans really have no answer. And obviously the Supreme Court was behaving in this partisan manner. I got an opportunity to just sit with what Alito was saying there. It's just like the idea that the anxiety that the president would feel because of the threat of looming prosecution would prevent him from being an effective leader says something a little bit about your mentality. You're telling on yourself. You're essentially saying that the president cannot do his job without breaking the law.
Stressing me out.
or that the anxiety of like there being political prosecutions later, which I think he's taking massive leaps in logic to get to, and then the underlying assumption is that he believes that this is a political prosecution of Donald Trump, that would be worse than the structure of a president being unable to be held accountable, that just the feelings of the president being like, I can't do what I want, is somehow more important than our system of government putting checks and balances on the executive branch, is one of the most unconstitutional concepts I have ever heard in my life, and one of the things that's in the least spirit of the good elements of what the founding fathers wanted, which is separation of powers, which is like not having a president to be able to behave as a king, to have a check on his or her, maybe at some time in my lifetime, authority. So it is one of the, he is such a freak, but what he's arguing there is that for a state, he said something about a stable democratic society, that immunity for criminal prosecution is important to maintaining a stable society for a president, is really inverted logic, to put it mildly. So seems like they'll probably send it back to the lower courts so they can make this abstract determination about what constitutes an official act as president or something that is related to him personally. But I can't think of anything more personal than Trump having a temper tantrum and trying to overturn the democratic results of an election. How that could be interpreted as an official act on behalf of the American people in the executive branch, you see how silly this argument is.
I'm imagining the Supreme Court in rubble and then a bunch of lawyers getting together to be like, hey, was that an official act or not that just sent that cruise missile into the Supreme Court?
Let's send it back down to the lower courts, and then maybe they can side. Or actually,
get our reading glasses
they're
out.
the new Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court apparently no longer exists in this scenario. I'm reminded of my talk with Harvard professor Ryan Dorfler yesterday about how now we need to start to talk about defying the Supreme Court, and there's a historic precedent to do so.
Yep.
But I digress. Folks, are you looking for the perfect gift to celebrate the moms in your life? Aura frames are beautiful Wi-Fi connected digital picture frames that allow you to share and display unlimited photos. It's super easy to upload and share photos with the Aura app. And if you're giving an Aura frame as a gift, you can even personalize the frame with preloaded photos and memories. I got this Aura frame for my mom, I think last year for Mother's Day. It's perfect for her. I got to load up pictures from when I was a baby with her to now, cute pictures of us. That's the kind of thing that moms just universally like. I know sometimes moms can be hard to shop for, or your grandma, or some of your relatives, your aunts, whoever, or anybody. This can be a birthday gift as well. Picture frames like this that show personal touches and ones that you can preload like Aura, those always go a really long way. From grandmothers to new mothers, aunts, and even friends in your life, every mom loves an Aura frame. Named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter, Aura frames are guaranteed to bring joy to moms of all ages. Right now, Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. Listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com/majority to get $30 off plus free shipping on their best-selling frame. That's Aura Frames, AURA frames.com/majority. Use code majority at checkout to save. Terms and conditions apply. So I actually know somebody, I've said this before, a young woman who went through a pretty severe health episode, and she lost a lot of her hair because of it. And she was really struggling to figure out a way to get some thickness back, and she was not feeling very confident. Nutrafol was extremely helpful for her, and I also know some men who have had positive experiences with it as well. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, with over 1 million people seeing thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding. Your hair is never just about your hair, and Nutrafol knows that. That's why Nutrafol takes a whole body approach to hair health, addressing the problems inside to keep hair growing nicely on the outside, supporting your lifestyle, not just your hairstyle. Physician formulated with drug-free ingredients, Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are clinically tested to multi-target key root causes of thinning, including stress, nutrition, and lifestyle. Nutrafol has multiple formulas that are tailored to give your hair what it needs to grow throughout different stages, such as aging and parenting, as well as for different lifestyles, such as plant-based diets. With Nutrafol, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription or doctor's visits required. Free shipping and automated deliveries ensure you'll never miss a day. See results in 3 to 6 months. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code TMR. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be with Owen Jones. We are back, and we are joined by Owen Jones and his adorable friend here, Whitman. Look at him.
Very adorable like this, not when he's howling. He was actually very well behaved before. As soon as we came on air, he suddenly decided he was going to be a little feisty little puss.
Oh, a little feisty. What does a cat howl sound like? I gotta know.
Well, this is a Burmese cat, and they're a chatty little group of pussies.
Oh yeah.
It's like, whoa! No, actually, he's worse. What he does, right, is he torments. He does trial and error. So what he does is he goes through different yowls because he's trying to work out which is the most annoying.
Yeah.
So he's like, roar, roar, and he's trying to work out. You can see he's kind of thinking which one's going to wind them up the most. Apparently, cats have because apparently we biologically trained to not be able to ignore the sound of babies crying.
Yep.
Yes.
And cats have worked this out. They work this out. They've got
serious?
the same frequency. Apparently so. They've got the same frequency. That's why you can't ignore them.
Wow. So, I mean, they're also a little devious. Like, honestly, they're kind of manipulative.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely. I mean, they are famously
I've never had a
manipulative,
cat, so I was dog person growing up. But my fiance loves cats, and I'm just starting to really entertain the idea of getting one. Sam has 2 cats and hates them, so that's I hear it from both sides. I mean, he
This is a
openly
compromise,
despises
though.
them. Yeah,
These are compromised cats because Burmese cat is a very champagne socialist cat to have. I've been vilified for getting these cats, but they're the most dog-like cats. But you have to take them for a walk, but they're very attached.
Gotcha.
So they don't do their own thing. They're very demanding and manipulative.
And they don't attack you in the night or something like that.
Yeah, they have a little wrestle. I like to, we wrestle.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, I was very happy to meet him, and I'm very happy to have you on, Owen, because we'd been chatting a little bit, and I was looking for an opportunity to have you on. This ongoing horror is basically, I think, all I think about, and probably a little bit all you think about as well.
Exactly the same. Exactly the same. I mean, you know what is interesting, isn't it? I think both of us are not naive. We understand in terms of the dynamics of, I guess, Western states, the Western media. I still can't get over the shock, every day. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's just the scale of the horror, the level of complicity, the level of deceit, the level of moral disgrace. It's odd. It's like we know the context, like we know why, like what's happening, why the media would behave in this way. That's why we do our own media stuff, isn't it? But it's still, I can't get over the shock. It's every day it hits me, and I keep talking to I interviewed this young lad, Khalil, Palestinian Christian from Gaza. His father died of a heart attack during the siege of the church by the Israeli forces and couldn't get medical care, so that's why he died. And he was getting his family out, managed to raise the funds to get his family out, and he had his 18-year-old sister, and 2 days ago she's dead. And you just read it, and it's just things like that. Just the horror just hits you over and over again, doesn't it?
Yeah,
well,
it does.
You can't let them get away with it. So
I know, but the thing that I think maybe you're experiencing as well is I feel a lot of rage about the narcissism of so many Westerners who live in absolute comfort and have decided that it is the most important story in the world to talk about the feelings of Zionists and how they're unsafe, how they feel like they are under attack. And it's just this incredible disconnect where you see how walled off they are from their humanity and how insular their world is, that I just fundamentally cannot understand. And that's the thing that lately has been getting me all fired up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I did a really interesting interview, so I was writing my own reviews. I mean, she was the interesting interviewee. Nara Milanich, who's a professor at Columbia University, and she's Jewish. And she was talking to the point you were making there, actually. What I was quite interested, see, very sweet, my cat, but not when he does this.
I like the soundtrack, yeah.
It's 5 a.m, not so good. What she was talking about, because I was quite interested, actually, in talking about, on the one hand, she was talking about, obviously, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and she was talking about that. The fact that anti-Semitism is real, it exists, and across the world, it's rising in various forms. Often, actually, if you look at the likes of the Orban regime in Hungary, the overlap between anti-Semitism and pro-Israel is quite interesting in itself. But what I was interested in is when you get, for example, Jewish students talking about the sense of feeling unsafe, and that's actually, I used to date this guy, Brazilian Jewish guy. He grew up in a very pro-Israel, might have to get rid of him, pro-Israel family. And he said he first went to university and he was first exposed to pro-Palestinian sentiments. And he said he got a fight or flight response. He felt actual genuine fear, and his heart started beating faster. And he put that to me because now he has the same view on Palestine as you or I. He put it to me as just that was a real emotion. And what Nara Milanich put to me, because I tried putting this kind of what we do, how you navigate that. And she was talking about, how you distinguish between real, discomfort and actual harm, and the way that conversation's been weaponized. But the broader point you're making is, I just think we need to be very clear about what's happening here, which is this is one of the great crimes of our age. I mean, what we're watching is a genocidal mania, genocidal frenzy, some of the worst crimes being committed on a daily basis of our time. And those who supported this are morally disgraced, and they've lost public opinion on both sides of the Atlantic. And actually, to be honest, in Britain, it's quite interesting. A poll in mid-October, now we're talking the 19th of October, showed over 50% supported an immediate ceasefire. Another 16% said they probably supported an immediate ceasefire. And just 3% said they definitely oppose an immediate ceasefire, which is the same number who think the earth is flat. So actually in Britain already, they started from a low base. In the United States, you can obviously speak more about this, but any critique of Israel has been from verboten and just outside of what is seen as you're allowed to talk about. And the fact now that more Americans than not, according to the polling, think genocide is being committed, that a large majority now over those who don't oppose Israel's onslaught. So they've lost that. They've lost public opinion. They know it's only heading in that one direction. They know it has consequences in terms of what that means for arming Israel, in terms of diplomatic support for Israel. And they also know that they're actually, their own position is under their legitimacy is in collapse. So they've tried to start a moral panic and redirect the real extremists, the real dangerous people, the ones protesting the genocide. And, that's their strategy. It's gonna pan out badly for them, because now what the world is seeing, on the one hand, are grave crimes being committed against the Palestinian people, both the violent onslaught, the famine that's been deliberately created, the genocidal statements made by Israeli leaders, officials, and other prominent figures in society. And now they're seeing people being beaten up, including middle-aged female academics who are saying, trying to intervene when students are being roughed off, themselves being brutally arrested. And they're looking at that, and it's having a transformative impact on how people see the world. People have seen too much. They can't unsee it. And it's not just the people who suffer the injustices, the people who are being arrested, who are going to remember that as a formative experience for the rest of their life, a searing sense of injustice that will never go away. The people watching it, because that phrase we always said, the whole world is watching. But that's a traditional kind of placard of protesters. That's never been more true. And I just think it's what they've done in terms of the protesters is in a desperate attempt to shift kind of scrutiny onto the people opposing genocide rather than supporting genocide. But it is backfiring. It's just politicizing more and more people. And I think that's really interesting myself.
I think it's really interesting, too, how it affects the future politics of this entire generation of basically anybody under 35, in part because in the United States, at least, it's a Democrat who is enabling this and helping, as president, helping Israel commit this genocide. It's got to be radicalizing in a way that I don't think we'll fully know the implications of. What I'm seeing with these demonstrators, too, is how they've basically taken so much of what they learned from George Floyd and 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests there about intersectionality, about solidarity, and about, honestly, tactics. They're improving on this as well. I saw The Atlantic, or I think some other magazine, that was very upset that these movements had a spokesperson. And it's like, well, we're not going to do what happened in Occupy, where these reporters would go around and Fox News try to find somebody who they could have a soundbite of. We're going to be militant and organized in our opposition to this. Like, this is an education on fascism. The police crackdown on these protests, as the people who are supporting the crackdown claim victimization, I think says everything people need to know about how close, honestly, liberalism can come to fascism under this kind of pressure cooker.
Yeah, I mean, we see throughout history. I mean, look, I mean, if we're talking about the actual rise of fascism, it was actually always preceded with liberal democracies becoming more and more authoritarian. It wasn't just like so-called liberal democracy with all its limitations and fascism the next day.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting if you look at Germany at the moment, where you have a nominally, supposedly, when people say centre-left, what does it really mean? But, the Social Democrats and the Greens, supposedly left of centre parties, also they're in coalition with the right of centre Free Democrats, but nonetheless, and they're, launching this clamp down on protesters. Anyone who speaks out, they're disproportionately targeting Jewish people. One piece of research suggested that about a third of those being deplatformed and arrested are Jewish. It's included actually many German Israelis. I interviewed a Jewish protester who was arrested there at the Palestine Congress that took place in Berlin, which was shut down by the police. And one of the German police officers was pointing at his kippah, his skull cap, and laughing. And he said you're being anti-Semitic. And then the police officer arrested him for offence to a police officer. And then those people were defiled as anti-Semites afterwards. What I just think is interesting about that, and the reason I raise that, is in Germany at the moment, the AfD, the far right, are on the rise. They're on the march, partly because of the failures of this so-called centre-left government to address huge problems in German society. And so you have this crazed moment where there's this idea of the racists of the left, because they're people speaking out against Israel's genocidal onslaught against Gaza, including Jewish people who have been defiled as anti-Semites. So you've got Yuval Abraham, who's an Israeli journalist who stood on stage at the Berlinale and denounced the occupation, and then the non-Jewish mayor of Berlin denounced him as an anti-Semite. The world turned on its head. And at the same time, you have actual racists with the AfD, who, by the way, have actual proper anti-Semites in them, on the march, being legitimized by a government which keeps demonizing minorities, not least Muslims, and using the question of Israel, incidentally, to demonize German Muslims, to make them kind of this idea of, often Muslim opposition to what's happening means they're anti-Semitic. So you can see in Germany, this is happening. This authoritarianism is happening under supposedly this social democratic-led government, when the far right are on the rise. And what they're doing is paving the way for something far worse, because what happens when they fall, you'll get maybe you could end up with a right-wing government, maybe supported by the AfD, and they will use the foundations laid by this to launch a far more aggressive assault on democratic rights and freedom. So Germany is a really striking example of where all of this could lead, and liberals are, the handmaidens of this. You can see that directly in Germany, in the way that liberals have built an environment where they've helped, drive the idea, the real dangerous extremists, those protesting against this. And then that has consequences, and the consequences include these terrible, brutal crackdowns, which I think could foreshadow something far worse. I think you're absolutely right.
You're on point about that. And I'm curious if your assessment is similar to mine of the way that there's this, I agree that they're losing public opinion quite quickly, but the right has now jumped in this country. Now they completely ignored Gaza until these campus protests, and now they're making their support for the genocide immensely clear. Speaker of the House doing so, and it appears to me that there's this extremely dangerous conflation of anti-Semitism with anti-whiteness. That's a big part of it, and that cynical usage is going to have a ton of consequences down the line.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've this argument that has been made, and you can see it by certain kind of on the hard right, who've argued that when you talk about, those who've talked about critical race theory being, I suppose, their classic, that's their that's the thing they keep attacking and setting up as their target, and they've argued that's actually talking about issues to do with racism and the way whiteness is used. That's actually a gateway to anti-Semitism. So you can see them doing that in that whole conversation. And I think what's so ridiculous is you've got the likes of Trumpism, Donald Trump and his movement, where he said repeatedly anti-Semitic things. And there's this long history of, as I said, anti-Semites for Israel. Richard Nixon is a really striking example of that, very pro-Israel and just a litany of anti-Semitic comments. So at the one hand, you've got this, you do have, in the Trump movement, he cheerleaded for actual far-right supremacists and neo-Nazis. And at the same time, they're using this to say, well, actually, because the way they reconfigured this is to go, Israel, in the way that before these sorts of people treated Jewish people as not white, in the way it's quite interesting, who's
Right.
deemed white or not. The Irish were once excluded from whiteness, for example. But now with the state of Israel, they've redefined it as an outpost of Western civilization facing the kind of Muslim barbarian hordes.
Light versus darkness. I mean, this has been the Netanyahu from the beginning speaking about, basically the savages versus the civilized. Mike Johnson said the exact same thing here after visiting Colombia and getting booed down in the United States. It is immensely terrifying. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're right. I agree. Well, it's exactly that. But some have been arguing. You can see this with people, by the way, came out from the New Atheist movement and the so-called New Atheists who just became raging, just obviously Islamophobes. And their argument
Sam Harris always was that.
Well, exactly. I mean, you get this argument of, well, actually, Israel's fight, it foreshadows the coming struggle with Muslims throughout the West, and they're on the front line, but we're next. Right. So you can see that kind of that, how that link is being used by those within Western societies who are clearly avowed racists, and they look at Israel as a template for how you deal with the othered minority. I think it's really dangerous, but you can see this with why the likes of the kind of far right international, how they lined up with Israel, and those who the sorts of people who pushed great replacement theory and other far right conspiracy theories. Why have they lined up behind the Israeli state? Because they've started to see it as a kind of the sort of ethno-state they want to build in other Western societies. I mean, that is how, whether or not people go, well, is that what Israel is or not in terms of how it's configured? That's what they see. That's how they're seeing it. And they're seeing it as a template for a coming confrontation with Muslims in general, and B, as building an ethno-state where you defend Western civilization. That's what they're looking at.
Right. Heavily militarized borders, maintaining a demographic majority of those who represent whiteness and killing anybody and expanding. I mean, that's just a far right idea. Richard Spencer has praised Israel for years about this. So we're obviously on the same page there. I'm curious because you've been going on a lot of these shows in the UK and talking to Israeli spokespeople and having to combat a lot of these talking points in real time on TV. What's your view of these Western news outlets and how different the tone was when maybe, say, you were going on in October to debate a Zionist versus right now? And I guess what were some of your experiences during all of these media hits with sometimes literally just like Israeli spokespeople?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I went on, I had this pre-booked media appearance on Sky News in October before 7th of October happened, but it was, I think, on the 9th of October, and I had to go on and talk about this. And I wasn't on with an Israeli spokesperson, I was just on with a right-wing Labour MP. And that was, obviously, it was a far more, it was a very different context. It was absolutely outrageous what happened in that particular discussion, because I remember
this discussion, Owen. And by the way, this was like I basically had a mental breakdown and cried because I just couldn't understand. It was one of those things where the way that she was speaking to you and just completely disregarding what you were saying about the coming slaughter just put the pit in my stomach for what exactly we were seeing now. But keep going.
Exactly, and what was so disturbing about it was. And I've seen this sometimes, this racist trope which keeps circulating amongst apologists for the Israeli onslaught, which is they were protesting before the war even began. It's like, are you off your heads? Like, within 3 days, the official death toll in Gaza was the same as the death toll on 7th of October. I mean, there was a mass slaughter happening in Gaza from the get-go. And what I was trying to talk about at the time was that to try and just talk, A, about context, and B, about what was happening in Gaza as I was speaking, and that was regarded as beyond the pale and all the rest. I would note then that particular Labour MP went on a so-called solidarity mission to Israel in January and appeared in a photo shoot with other Labour figures, with Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, who quite correctly is in South Africa's case alleging genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice because of comments Isaac Herzog made at the time about collective guilt of the Palestinian people. The point I'd make is it's interesting. You're right. It's become easier to make just because the scale of the crime is so obscene. The point I would just make is this is the biggest scandal in Western journalism of our time. I know the bar was on the floor, and I know we could look at the Iraq War and the role of the Western media then. The point I would just make, and again, I'm not being naive here because I understand how it works in the Western media for a long time. The point I would make, and the point I was trying to make at the time when it was actually the beginning of all this, is Israeli leaders and officials at the beginning said what they were going to do. They were very clear. They weren't subtle. I mean, I interviewed Raz Sigal, an Israeli American associate professor of genocide and Holocaust studies, and he said it's very rare for intent to be so overtly spoken. And the point is, they said at the beginning, like, for example, the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, he said, we're going to cut off all the essentials of life because we're fighting human animals. He said on day 2 that he was lifting all restrictions on Israeli soldiers. On day 3, all restraints on Israeli soldiers. You had just multiple Israeli ministers and officials saying they were going to wipe Gaza out and all the rest. And they were going to encourage a mass exodus. The intelligence ministry had a document in the second week where the preferred option was to force the entire population into the Sinai Desert in Egypt. The point I'm making is, it was from the very beginning, you just had to listen to what Israeli leaders were saying. And I looked at some of these quotes. I did a Google search for the whole of October, and in most Western media outlets, they didn't even mention these quotes. But if we had a media which did its job, all coverage would be framed around what Israeli leaders and officials said they were going to do. And you know what? What they said they were going to do is what they did. It's literally the perfect guide. They said they were going to wipe out Gaza. They said they regarded Palestinians as collectively guilty. They said they were going to starve them, and they did all of those things. And that's what is so obscene, because
that's the horror of it. Yeah.
Well, that's the horror, because it was in full plain sight. We're not relying on leaked documents in the main.
Yes.
We're just relying on what was promised from the start. But Western media outlets decided these statements weren't even relevant, and they just framed it as a war of self-defense. And then later on, we can have a debate about, is this proportionate or not? Let's agree to disagree. And that is an absolute raging disgrace. And the legitimacy of the Western media outlet after this is not going to survive for a lot of people, because people have seen too much. The framing of the Western media, even now, they're trying to, because the scale of the crime is too big, so you can't just hide it. But they're still not framing it based on, from the very beginning, there was all these genocidal statements. They then executed what they were going to do. And because they can't do that, because then they would have to address their own failure to talk about that from the start and their own complicity. But that's why now even now when I talk about it, I went on debate this Hen Mazik, who's an Israeli influencer. I mean, he embarrassed himself, if I'm going to be brutally honest. But even then, it was like I was up against him and the presenter. Right. As though I was still the one saying the controversial things, because I was talking about how they imposed a famine deliberately, whilst I quoted from A, the evidence provided by what Israeli leaders said they were going to do, B, the agencies on the ground, and C, David Cameron, the foreign secretary, doing a public letter going through all the ways Israel was blocking aid deliberately from getting into Gaza. So it's a scandal, and we can't let these media outlets get away with it. They are complicit in a genocide. That's the fact.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And you mentioned David Cameron there. What Labor obviously moved or sprinted away from Jeremy Corbyn and his wing of the party. Keir Starmer has basically tried to move Labor back towards the right, towards the center. But the Conservatives are immensely unpopular right now in Britain, is my understanding, and are expected to kind of get shellacked in the upcoming election. How has Starmer adjusted any of his rhetoric since, in the coming weeks? Coming months, how has Labour changed, if at all, in supporting Israel?
Well, from the very beginning, Keir Starmer, this was 2 days afterwards, he was asked on radio, which was also filmed, he was asked, does Israel have the right to cut off water and energy? And he said, yes, I think Israel has that right. And what he did, bear in mind, Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer by trade, which he spoke about before he got elected and then didn't say anything about afterwards. He understands. Look, I know what Article 33 of the Geneva Convention says about collective punishment. I'm not a lawyer. I know what a war crime is and not. I know if you cut off water and energy to a civilian population, which is all you're doing if you cut off water and energy, you've committed a very serious war crime. He said they had the right to do that. A number of shadow ministers, as in people on his front bench, went on TV, backed him up. And then 2 weeks later, he gaslit everyone by saying he never thought Israel had the right to cut off the basics of life, even though you can hear what he said. It's just, that's Trumpian. All these liberals, he talks about post-truth politics, misinformation, the extremes. They're trying to make it upend reality. That was a classic example. And but what he did all the way, or what he's tried to do all the way, is basically just track the State Department. I mean, so in the way you occasionally get like hand wringing if the US administration does some hand wringing, they'll do some hand wringing. But what they do in practice is a really good example. Even when they backed a ceasefire after 35,000 people have been slaughtered, when they finally backed a ceasefire, the Scottish National Party, the pro-independence Scottish Party, tabled a motion in Parliament which included a condemnation of Israel for collective punishment. Now, Labour said that's unacceptable. So they gutted that motion and got it taken out, because what that would mean is you would have to then take actions. If you've accepted Israel is guilty of collective punishment, you've accepted it's committed war crimes, you then have to end arms. You then have to you have to change your diplomatic position. And the point I'm making there is Benjamin Netanyahu knows that Western politicians, for domestic purposes, will wring their hands sometimes. Oh God, this is terrible. Look how he's suffering. Oh God. Oh, we don't want to see all this death. But without any actions, it means nothing. So all is what the UK, another example, and this for me is one of the worst. I mean, look, it's also awful, like choosing moments. But, UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, which is Gaza's main humanitarian agency, and Israel launched a smear campaign to destroy it on
Still
the
no
day.
evidence.
That's the point. So the International Court of Justice put Israel on trial for alleged genocide, and then coincidentally on the same day, we suddenly had a big story about UNRWA alleging links with terrorism and all the rest of it. No evidence provided, and the likes of the British government and others cut funding to it. The Labour opposition could have taken a stance then, but they didn't. They backed the ending of funds and said these are serious allegations that have to be taken seriously. And now they put out on the day of this new report, which shows no evidence for it, they put out, their spokesperson says, well, actually, this shows that we can trust UNRWA and all the rest of it. It's like, how dare you? You helped pave the way for this. So the point I'd make is they've done hand-wringing. They ended up backing a ceasefire basically when the US government said they backed a ceasefire or an end of hostilities. All of this is often like, it's this, a vegetarian between meals. It's like we could, and what they mean in practice is they, even when it was leaked by a Conservative MP that the British government received legal advice that Israel had broken humanitarian law, which legally then necessitates ending arms sales, Labour couldn't even bring themselves then to say end arms sales. Instead, they said they should publish the legal advice. It's like, well, what? Like, it's all they've done all the way through is track what they think is acceptable based on how far the US government's gone, how much hand-wringing they've done. US government opposes a Rafah offensive. We can do that then. But it's toothless opposition, and they legitimised war crimes at the beginning, which enabled the British government to give Israel a blank check, knowing they were not under any domestic political pressure. And actually, if Labour put the British government under pressure, they could have forced, given how weak the British government is, into a different position. And that would have put pressure on the Biden administration, because a lot of Democrats would have gone, hold on, Britain's now saying this. It would have strengthened voices there. So, yeah, my view is what Labour did is a moral outrage and disgrace, and they helped legitimise one of the great crimes of our age. And all the hand-wringing in the world cannot make up for the fact that they legitimised war crimes and the mass slaughter of innocent people. And they should never be able to get away with it.
I mean, and I also am struck by the lack of lessons learned from following the U.S.'s lead as it relates to the Iraq War, which seemingly Labour should have understood, and yet we're still making the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, these are the sorts of people running the Labour Party, frankly, a lot of them who, even knowing what they know now, would probably invade Iraq all over again. That's who we're talking about. These are people who, this is just their political cause and creed.
Right.
They're not people who look at, because what we've seen in the 21st century, and this is the tragedy of our politics, is we always get proven right in the worst possible way. Every single foreign military adventure now has been a catastrophe. Afghanistan, catastrophe. Iraq, catastrophe. Libya, catastrophe. And we're always right in the worst possible way. We were right about this. And they're never going to forgive us for being right about Gaza, by the way. This is the problem, you see. What happens is we say it's going to be a catastrophe, and then it's kind of often generally worse often than even we say.
Yeah.
And these ghouls, they walk from crime scene to crime scene, splattered with more blood as they walk to a different crime scene, going, we need some more blood, guys. And they're still treated and venerated as respectable, as statespeople, as moderate. And we're the fringe lunatics. And all we have to prove to show for it fine is our terrible vindication is a lot of dead people. But the fact is, this is why this has to be different. Because what they do every time, they've done this now on another catastrophe, which we said would be a catastrophe on its own terms and in terms of the human impact. And we were right again, but if we don't this time hold them accountable, because in the Iraq War, they just carried on with their lucrative careers. I mean, Tony Blair, the people who had to resign in Britain were the people who opposed the Iraq War, the people who were seen to be too critical of the Iraq War. Tony Blair ends up working for some multi-million-pound institute he has, partly funded by the likes of the Saudi dictatorship, with no consequences. And unless we force consequences on these people, including in the media, this will keep happening. We're stuck in a doom loop of death and destruction. So I think this is so important now that we don't let them get away with it. And that's why we have to just hold our ground.
Ahead of this Rafah invasion, which all satellite data seems to be indicating Israel is going to go ahead with, even though the Biden administration is saying, please don't do it, please don't do it. We're not going to make you not do it.
Here's some war material.
Here's some more bombs. We just...
Oh, no, but they might brief something to Axios. They might brief something to and go, oh, we're really sad.
Barack Ravid, new breaking news. Biden has a hernia because of how much Netanyahu is stressing him out. Anyway,
Biden really swore this time. He swore. He really swore. He didn't just swear, though. He said lots of swear words this time.
The ones you can't say after 11 p.m. Yes, right. I mean, the really bad ones. It's so ridiculous. But the other just horror. So as we await that horror, and it appears it's going to happen. There are mass graves that are continuously being uncovered outside of hospitals, and there are some indications, not confirmed yet, but there are children's bodies that are in these mass graves, and they could have been buried alive. Your reaction?
When you're living through one of the great crimes of your age, when you hear two words in conjunction, mass graves, that's a pretty big clue, isn't it? That's like the red flag, I would say. If you look throughout the great crimes of history, mass graves come up, and I would know that Gaza is full of mass graves, by the way. It's important that, look, this has actually been reported on, but, if you look at the work of, for example, Euromed Human Rights Monitor, they've been tracking the number, mass graves all over Gaza, which if we had independent monitors and, then we would, if suddenly this war ended now,
yeah,
and where there was actual access, you would just find mass grave after mass grave after mass grave.
And the death toll would be even higher than what Euromed has been consistently higher because they count people presumed dead under rubble. But
exactly,
even they are an undercount, Owen, because we just have no idea. They've killed all the record keepers.
A drastic undercount. I mean, look, the reason it's an undercount is we have the official death toll of around 35,000, which is a drastic undercount. I mean, the official death toll has always been vindicated in previous conflicts. It's been with the US privately, and Israel even have validated this one now. But it excludes those buried under the rubble, which is an unknown number. It excludes people who've been killed, and not been reported. But you're right, the health ministry, that Gaza's been destroyed virtually. So the idea that you've got accurate record keeping now is not really possible. But it also doesn't include people dying because the medical system's been destroyed. That itself is a genocidal act. You don't have a healthcare system. You impose a death sentence on huge numbers of people every single day. You impose a death sentence on people with heart conditions. You impose a death sentence on people with cancer. You impose a death sentence on pregnant women. You impose a death sentence on newborn babies every single day. And that itself isn't in the official death toll. That's why we always use this very clinical sounding term, excess deaths. That is deaths above the norm. And that includes people violently killed. And we know, I'm afraid to say this, we know from history in this sort of total war that the most people are not killed by the direct violence. They're killed by the destruction of society, not least the healthcare system, which itself is, so when we look at these mass graves now and we can see, the bodies dug up, they're wearing medical gowns, they have catheters, they have medical tubes sticking out, their hands tied behind their back, signs of torture. It's extremely clear, and we know this because Israeli soldiers have been bragging and boasting on TikTok for comic amusement about how they see the entire population is collectively responsible and guilty. Amalek, that invoking of Amalek in which Benjamin Netanyahu did, in which the Israelites were commanded by God to kill all men, women, children, babies, and livestock. Constant use of Amalek. The fact is, and I have to say this, the Palestinian journalists who have still survived, because we've had the biggest killing of Palestinian journalists in a conflict in recorded history, are the lions of the world press back. And without them, we just wouldn't even have a clue about what's going on. But all I say is, they can't get access to a lot. They're suffering. A lot of them have to fight to feed themselves and their families, what remains of their families often. We don't have foreign journalists, obviously, with access to Gaza because Israel refuses to allow them in. So all we're seeing at the time is just the tips of the iceberg. And we can see here in these hospital grounds, vast numbers of people being dug up who clearly have suffered, have been, they pose no threat. If someone was a combatant and their hands are tied behind their back, they're classed under international law as hors de combat. That means they are not combatants; they are protected people. There's no ground; it's a war crime to kill them. So it doesn't matter, even if they go, "Oh, they're terrorists," and they use that as a catch-all term. Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, did a really good piece which showed that when Palestinians cross an invisible kill line, they are slaughtered, and then they are classified afterwards as terrorists, and then put in that toll of so-called terrorists. So the fact is, whether or not they were combatants, if they're under detention and they pose no threat, you can't kill them. And we know that civilians are being classed as so-called combatants, and we know they can get away with it because we can only rely on the testimonies of the remaining Palestinian journalists who haven't been killed, who are working under the most unbearable conditions.
They're heroes in every sense of the word, and it will be something when maybe in like 10 years they are valorized, but it's just not going to do too much good right now. But before I let you go, Owen, I just had to ask you a bit about that insane immigration policy that the conservative government in the UK passed earlier this week, which basically human rights experts say is unworkable, that it's also illegal, and it basically says disregards all existing international asylum law. And I don't know what the asylum law is in Britain. You can let me know. I would imagine asylum law there as well. And says, well, we're going to just deport all these migrants trying to come over to Rwanda without looking into their claims in any way that would constitute due process. What's happening with that?
So what's happened is so-called safe legal routes have been closed down by the British government. So we had more people claiming asylum at the beginning of the century than we do now. But now what happens is far more arrive by boats. That's still, by the way, a tiny fraction of the numbers arriving in Britain at all. We're talking about, a very small group of people. At the moment, as far as I know, the biggest group are Afghan refugees. People familiar with Afghanistan might recall Britain was involved in a certain war there for 2 decades. So a classic example of involved in often, terrible violence and then refusing to deal with the human consequences of it. Now, obviously, in the world, there are about 110 million displaced people. Most of those are internally displaced. The vast majority of those who leave those places are in neighboring countries which are poor. A very small percentage come to Europe, and of that very small percentage, a minority come to Britain, we take less than France and other countries. They're often people who speak English. So I've gone into form a refugee camp in Calais, and these are often people who are English speakers because of people might remember something called the British Empire, when Britain went around colonizing and stealing people's land. So a lot of them, all they have people they know here. So it's often people from, who have connections. Now, rather than have safe and legal routes, so people arrive by boat, and their solution is just to, everyone gets deported to Rwanda, which is ruled actually by a human rights abusing regime. Now, that was actually shut down by the Supreme Court here on the grounds that the government couldn't guarantee the safety of migrants and refugees when they arrive in Rwanda. And the court upheld that this was unlawful. They pointed to Rwanda's bad human rights record. So the government tried to bypass this with a bill which says basically Rwanda's safe. Just declare it by law. No, Rwanda's fine. It's fine to go to Rwanda. Now, this would mean, so if someone arrives here and all their family have been murdered in front of them and they've been tortured and raped, they get deported. So there's no case by
asylum
case
process, right?
No, exactly. Now it is performative cruelty because only a tiny number would ever go to Rwanda anyway. It costs the amount they spend as well. Not that they should be the point, but it's estimated it'll cost $670 million to deport 300 people. So that's £2 million per person. So all of it is just symbolic nonsense. But the Tories have really wrecked themselves here because what they've done is they've made stop the boats their big kind of plank. But the boats are just going to keep coming.
Because they lost with the trans stuff now. This is the new
it's
people to hate.
Cultural, but because the Tories have wrecked the country, but this country's a mess. So obviously you go, well, the health service is collapsing, living standards are worse than they were in 2008, the infrastructure is falling apart. This country is a real mess. So they're foreigners. But the problem is actually all they do is they've driven up the salience of the issue for often their core supporters, but those boats will just keep coming. So all it does is antagonize their supporters more, who then defect to a more right-wing party, which is another reason the Tories are in a mess, whilst obviously angering lots of people who think this is obviously terribly inhumane and ridiculous. So they've shot themselves in the foot. My own prediction is very few people will end up in Rwanda, if at all. And obviously there's a broader point about how refugees and migrants are treated in this country with terrible cruelty, detention centres here, for example, and the terrible conditions that they endure. But this is a performative act of cruelty, basically, in order to go, look how wicked we are to people who are fleeing. And,
he learned from DeSantis. I mean, he learned from DeSantis and Greg Abbott, who did that stupid stunt with Martha's Vineyard or sending, migrants to New York as well. This is the new frontier, I think, of far-right politics, as we were kind of saying at the beginning, to wrap a bow on this. Heavily militarized borders, trying to keep the hordes of people of either, black people, migrants, Arab people out of the country, Muslim people in this country, Latino people, and distracting from deregulation and far-right austerity politics while doing so. So that's what we're up against, folks. Owen, where can people support your work? Subscribe to your Patreon, subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Just people to check out my semi-coherent babbling thoughts. They're just typing Owen Jones Talks on YouTube. So yeah, just Owen Jones. And my content overwhelmingly focuses on Gaza. I think like you, it's just all I can really think about.
Yeah.
And I just think, I do think we have I do think our alternative media outlets like yourself, which I'm a huge fan. What you do is incredible. But, I've always thought, obviously there's an important role, but this is really important. I mean, I would never forgive myself if I didn't use my platform in that way. But we have to do this, and in order to bear witness, but also in order to try and encourage people to fight to stop this monstrous crime. So yeah, I've been using my platform as best I can to elevate voices as well, including Palestinian voices. I just mentioned, obviously, talking to this new generation, I just think of American Jewish leftists, I just think is so inspiring. Right. And I think they're at the forefront. So it's just trying to elevate voices we need to hear from.
Well, you're doing great work. Big fan myself. I'll read this I am, and then we'll let you go. Cedar Nomics writes in, because of the Gaza genocide, I started getting videos of Owen Jones. Immediately watched so many other clips of him. He makes every Zionist propagandist he debates look even more deceitful and incompetent every time. Absolutely love my favorite leftist podcast doing a crossover episode with him. So
I love it when my mum writes in. No, that's very sweet, honestly. Very sweet.
Yes, you're welcome back anytime to keep talking about this horror, but maybe we'll have some better news soon. Hope springs eternal, as Sam would say. Thanks, Owen. Really
well, keep up your amazing work, and cheers, guys.
You as well. All right, folks, quick break, and then we'll be joined by Kate Willett. We are back, and we are joined by Kate Willett, comedian and actress whose new comedy special Loopholes is out right now. It just came out a few days ago, and you can watch it on Apple TV or Amazon. Kate, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
I've known you through Twitter for a while. I watched a bit of your special this morning. Thanks for sending that over. I was laughing quite a bit.
Thanks.
You've got some great stuff on feminism. Refreshing to hear because, you know, I love my coworkers, but I'm surrounded by dudes all day. So any female-led content, and I'm also a huge sports fan. So, you know, I need some good female laughs on occasion. Everyone should check out your special. It's really funny.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's good also because you're political, right? Like you decide to take on political issues or social issues head on. What's your experience being a comedian that chooses to kind of engage with politics or big issues like that?
I mean, yeah, that's complicated because, like, you know, I don't think it's helpful from a career perspective. I'll tell you that, you know, like,
right.
There's definitely a reason, you know, why you see, you know, a lot of comedians and, you know, other people in the entertainment industry, you know, not really talk about politics that much, except for maybe like promoting, you know, Democratic Party, you know, vote against Trump or whatever, you know, because it's like the more you're political, at least on the left side, you know, like the more that you alienate the people that are in a position to, you know, sign your paycheck, you know? So I do think there's probably more like secret left-wing beliefs among people in the entertainment industry than you think. You know, like a lot of people are very like socialist sympathetic, and I think there were a lot of secret Bernie supporters, you know, but like when it comes to being like right-wing, there's no consequence for that at all. Like if anything, that's like it's a career skyrocketer within a certain circle.
Right.
You know?
Sorry, I have to jump in here, Kate. Like I remember, like I'm curious about the like kind of the crests and the troughs of, you know, politicized comedy, because I saw a lot of like maybe right wingy guys complaining about people in the left wing comedians in the Trump era getting political all of a sudden, and on a I can understand from a purity standpoint a comedian saying something like that, but I also see a lot of these guys now going on different platforms to be like, hey, why are migrants allowed to punch cops now, and they make content out of that. So like they just get like you said, like you can get right wing, and all of a sudden it's not getting political. It's just like observing the world all of a sudden.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just the exact same explanation that you would think, which is that, left-wing viewpoints challenge power and right-wing viewpoints support them, But I also think that it's, there's kind of been like different comedy trends that are popular. I think that during the pandemic, like more right-wing comedy really skyrocketed. And like one factor in that literally was just that a lot of the, like empathetic lefties we were quarantining, like we were in our house.
Right.
Whereas like, the more kind of like, F COVID guys, like they were out there performing. And, I don't want to paint with like too broad a brush because, it's not like there's degrees of this. Like, it's not like everybody who is, political in any way in comedy is super right wing or anything. Like that's not the case. There's a lot of just like, liberal people who maybe don't even think about politics that much, but like they definitely support the right to choose. They definitely like stand with, LGBT people. So, it's definitely not all one thing.
Well, I mean, there's something interesting, though, because we were chatting about this, I think, maybe a few months ago when Stavi, and I can never say his last name, Halkias. I loved his special. He's great. Like, he went on Joe Rogan, and he has good left-wing politics, but Rogan kept trying to get him to say, like, these migrants are, like, they're, what's your take on that? I mean, kind of Rogan centering himself with a lot of big name comedians that lean right, and there's almost just like this I think that might contribute to the hesitancy, getting an opportunity to platform your work on his show. Like it's kind of a big deal right now for a certain subset of entertainers, comedians.
Yeah, I mean, it's with like Rogan specifically, I think that like I honestly don't think that it's like he is not having people on his show because they're like liberal or left or anything like that. I think it just has much more to do with like who actually like knows each other in that kind of particular community, which does have a lot of right-wing beliefs in it, but not exclusively. Like to me, it's much more of like a scene versus a like ideological test, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And the scene for leftists who say, like yourself, who are speaking out about Gaza, I mean, in the entertainment industry, what's that like right now?
I don't really know. For myself, like I have, I've worked within the industry at various points. I've, made stuff myself in a more DIY way at various points. And like, I think for me, it's always been a priority to just be myself, both like in my work and in real life. And then just like, if there's times where that leads to like, I gotta produce my own stuff, then that's fine. I will live with the consequences of that, but for a long time, I think, speaking out about Palestine, has been like the most career ending thing that you could possibly do within the entertainment industry. And that may be changing right now. I think it is to some extent, because I don't think that like regular liberals are really on board with this level of mass slaughter at all,
I think it is changing. I mean, I don't pretend to know everything about the industry, obviously, but I do see that. I mean, the backlash that Marissa Barrera, I think I'm saying her name right, or is it Melissa?
I think it might be Melissa. Yeah. I wasn't familiar with her work.
Yeah, she just had a movie that came out, a horror movie that killed it at the box office. I think it was at Abigail. One of I don't follow horror, so I don't remember. So I'm kind of speaking off the cuff, but. She did well, like the movie did well, despite a lot of bad press about her Gaza stance. And that might be a signal to some people that, hey, you can maybe begin to start speaking out about this, even if it makes you a little bit scared, because the box office consequences that seem probably a lot of people were worried about just didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, and the more people who are like really famous that speak out, like the easier it becomes, I think, for other people who are not at that level of career stability. Like, I don't agree with every single take he's ever had, but I do really appreciate Mark Ruffalo's advocacy, Susan Sarandon. There's a comic named Joel Kim Booster who is so funny. And, he's been very vocal about Gaza. And I do think it's starting to change. Boots Riley is another one who comes to mind. He's not a stand-up comic, but he is, I think, an open communist who very much gets stuff made within the entertainment industry. And that to me was just like, that was unimaginable,
Right.
just a few years ago.
So Kate, how'd you get your start? Where are you from? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
I started in San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a Californian, born and raised. I moved to New York about 7 years ago, and I started stand up in the Bay Area scene, which is it's a very fun scene. It's very like it's weird in the California way. Like you'll be on the same show with like a trapeze artist or something, or like a clown troupe, So I started there, moved to New York, I think in like 2017. And I think I did a lot of like theater stuff before stand up, but it ended up being like a lot of like interpretive dance kind of stuff in basements. And it was funny, but I did not know that. And
funny in a different way. Yes.
Yeah. Once I started like being on board with being funny on purpose, I think that, that has been a better direction for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and how long have you been doing comedy? What should people know about your special? All that good stuff.
I've been doing comedy, I guess it's probably like 11 or 12 years at this point. This special is something that I wrote, some of it right before the pandemic, some of the stand-up, in the year before we quarantined, and then some in like the year or two right after. And I think, at this time in my life, when I was writing this material, I was very much thinking about, like, what does it mean to be an adult woman? Because it clearly looks very different, than it did for like, my boomer parents or whatever, but we've had all of these kinds of like viewpoints, kind of debated in the public sphere, like there was like the very like lean in type of feminism that was really hot for a while, and now we got like the trad wife thing, and I ended up like thinking a lot about that stuff, but then also thinking about like how it applied to my own life, because I during the pandemic went from being like on the road by myself all the time to like all of a sudden like, wait, I'm like in my house cooking dinner for a guy every day. What the hell,
Right.
And and so I don't know. It just ended up being like, I think, a mixture of personal and also political stuff for me, but a lot around issues about like domesticity, feminism, and just plenty of like sex jokes as well.
Oh, those are always fun. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you have kind of a similar anxiety that I do as somebody who speaks out about politics, or put yourself out there with your opinions and you stand in front of a microphone. I often feel this just like nagging voice in the back of my head that I'm always trying to brush away. Like, you should be more docile. You're being a little aggressive. You're being like somebody, this is not really what a woman should be doing, or ladylike.
Yeah.
And I still deal with that. I mean, I just turned 30 and I just thought I'd grow out of it at this point. But it's that I feel like every woman to a degree has a level of that anxiety. I mean, was that something you were wrestling with what you explored in your special?
Yeah, I think that was something that was a huge concern for me when I was just a tiny bit younger, like especially my late 20s, early 30s. That was kind of when all of this, like, I don't know, I want to say like men's rights rhetoric like started rising in the culture. And, like this idea that like, to be an attractive woman, you have to be, like feminine, submissive. And obviously like that's an old idea. Like these, incel characters like didn't come up with it. But, it's like this thing about like it's kind of being, resold to people now. And I think even though I never believed in that stuff on an ideological level, like it did kind of get in there and caused a lot of anxiety for me. I wrote a lot about that in my book that's on Audible, Dirtbag Anthropology, which is another thing you can check out if you have an Audible subscription. But no, I totally relate to that. I don't feel it as much anymore. And I think that the reason is because I just finally like made a life where I just have so many people that are just so supportive, but the pressure to like, kind of turn down your light as a woman is right. So much. Yeah.
It really is. And then I think that also informs the reaction to when women don't turn down their light and they're outspoken. And then you see that blowback of why, oddly, I was going down an old wormhole about Rosie O'Donnell, who I think I was reminded because she's been posting about Gaza a lot. And I just really appreciate that about her. She's such a passionate person. And that whole time when she was on The View for that short period and was a bit of a firebrand, completely right about Iraq, by the way. Fox News talked about her all the time. Like, I remember just being in high school, Rosie O'Donnell was a punchline just to make, like, a woman who was heavyset. Or a woman
Leno would have a monologue joke about her every night, basically.
Right. Well, oh God, that guy's the worst. And it was her gayness, her being a lesbian, her being outspoken, or she would call herself a fat lesbian, right? Like, it was all of these things that triggered the misogyny of the right and their obsession with maintaining these gender roles. Yeah. And I just, I look back at those old clips and it's like, oh, she was the only reasonable person on that whole panel. And Trump Trump talked about her in 2016. Oh, that she was a fat pig. It's crazy how enduring it is.
It's so crazy. Like with Rosie O'Donnell specifically, like I never really thought about her except for like, oh, she's a really funny actress. And then when Trump brought her up, like as a, like she's like enemy number one, I was like, what the hell? Like I've been not thought about this person for years. Where is this coming from? But yeah, I do feel like there's been like a few iterations of like, powerful Republicans, like just kind of explicitly trying to like, not just through laws, like the abortion stuff, but also like through, culture and speech, trying to like, tamp down any sort of feminist impulse.
Right, exactly. Well, to support the feminist impulse, one could check out the comedy special Loopholes that Kate did. It's on Amazon, Apple TV. It just came out just a few days ago. Anything else you want to say about it, Kate?
It's fun. It's pretty short. It's like 45 minutes long. You can also watch it on YouTube. You can buy it on YouTube. And yeah, follow me on Instagram, Kate.Willett with 2 L's and 2 T's. That's where I post my tour dates. And I travel around the country all the time performing stand-up. So, would love to see you guys at some shows. It's great to talk to you guys in real life today because I listen to the show almost every day. So it's usually a one-way relationship, whereas this is
all right. Well, we've opened up the lines of communication. We've crossed the parasocial threshold into the we're close to social. We're not in person yet, but maybe soon. Kate, thanks so much for your time today, and we'll put a link to your special wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye. You too. All right, guys, with that, we're going to wrap up the free part of this program, head into the fun half, where we may take your calls. Question mark.
I don't know.
Wait, we may not. Honestly, I don't want to set false expectations. We're not going to take calls today.
Prepare them for next week.
I just made a big decision.
She's gonna apologize for it. No, sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning. Check out our interview with two activists from Uncommitted New Jersey on Tuesday at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. And we'll have a Sunday show for you this weekend, folks. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
On ESPN on Tuesday, we did a mock draft, so you can go back and check out how right I was or how wrong I was. Honestly, rare. My mock draft held up pretty damn well. I gotta be honest with you. I picked some picks like dead on, even later round ones. Okay. I mean, I nailed that Jacksonville Jaguars taking Brian Thomas Jr. thing. You can check that out, youtube.com/ESPN show. And on Monday, we'll be back to talk about the results. The insane decision by the Atlanta Falcons to take 24-year-old Michael Penix when they just signed Kirk Cousins to what amounts to a 3-year deal for like over $100 million. It makes no sense. youtube.com/ESPN show. Matt, I think the Vikings killed the draft, by the way. So I'm like, as I begin to try to indoctrinate you back into football, I'm going to try to hype them up a little bit here. They drafted their quarterback, who I actually kind of am high on, J.J. McCarthy, and then they got the best pass rusher in the draft in Dallas Turner out of Alabama.
It's cool because I was never big on Kirk Cousins, but as a Vikings fan, I have to see it before I believe. It's like UFOs,
right?
Like people can tell me you're like a Pentagon person being like, hey, I saw some pretty convincing stuff in these documents. It's like, well, that's pretty interesting, and I hope it works out for them. But I'll believe it when one of those things is buzzing the New York City skyline, and I can see it with my own eyes. So when Justin Jefferson is running into the end zone in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl, then I'll believe it.
All right. Well, you calling me a Pentagon person is the meanest thing you've ever.
You're like that drunk guy that Ken Klippenstein had to harass into shutting up about UFOs.
I'm just like that person. Everyone says it. All right, guys, heading into the fun half.
Maybe that's slanderous about the drunk thing. I don't remember.
It actually is slanderous, and I will.
No, not about you, but about him.
Well, I'm still calling Mark Bankson. Maybe add you to my other pending litigation. Not really. All right, guys. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder, what a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on! Fuck 'em. Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back, folks. It is the fun half of the majority report. Let's read some IMs. Mike from Texas. I love the point Owen made about how our side keeps being proven right in the worst possible ways, and at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter. 20 years on, anyone rarely even talks about the dead Iraqi and Afghan children, among other atrocities of these wars. Keep fighting and protesting, be on the right side of history, but don't be shocked if it'll have a minimal impact on actions of those in power, and they'll get away with murder. See Bush and Cheney and gang as a prime example. Well, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I was just gonna say, like, that's a little bit too pessimistic. I think like this, the problem isn't like being right is worthless in a vacuum. Like be in a chat or in a Twitter reply, it doesn't matter. And some people, like, especially when they crap on actual organizers, saying like this isn't like the ultra enough thing to do, as they just sit there just commenting, it's worthless. But it is leading to organizing. Like, you have the UAW calling for a ceasefire. Like these sorts of issues, it is getting through the population in real ways, and the point is to keep organizing it to the point where you actually can be something beyond just like the Greek chorus, commenting on things on the outside of it.
Yeah. I agree that it's a little bit too pessimistic, and if your point is right that will we see Biden locked in The Hague? Will Biden be? I mean, no, of course. Like, in the same way that Dick Cheney and Bush got away with it, Biden will get away with it. Netanyahu may get away with it. But I want him. I don't. That's less likely, I think, but still likely.
But like, who cares about what accountability those individuals face? What we want is Palestinians to have their land back, and for people to live in the region in a structure that isn't creating racism and death.
I do care about that accountability, but it's not the primary concern right now at all.
It's way secondary.
Right. But I hear your point and the feelings that are behind what you had to say. Ostensibly, leftists said big protest here at the combined campus of CU Denver, Metropolitan State and Denver Community College last night. Administration threatened a police presence after dusk, but students successfully fended off DPD, and the Solidarity encampment remained intact overnight for another day of protest and activism today. Another great round of interviews this week, Emma and team. Left is indeed the best. Tic-tac-toe, obviously the threat of accountability make future presidents very nervous and force them to do crimes, but with no accountability, they can really get in there and do the right thing for the benefit of all. I know, it's really such naked authoritarianism that, these conservative justices are showing off here. John in T-Berg, no disrespect to Sam, of course, but Emma interview is going to land MR that 6-time award-winning moniker all by herself. Thank you for everything you do, MR crew. Thank you very much. Blind Anti-Imperialism said, in your opinion, has the outrage over the Central Kitchen aid workers killing from the establishment liberal media worn off? Yes. By the way, that was also then, Netanyahu attacked Iran. That was all, I think, coordinated to start to galvanize Western support. After a few days, what did you say?
No, I agree.
A few days after that, I felt a noticeable change in how people talked about everything. Almost a month later, I hear the usual crap of everything is so polarized, or everybody's so polarizing. Why can't we all just get along in reaction to all the student protests? Yep. I mean, the pro-Zionists are doing their damnedest to make the conversation about college campuses right now, and it's working in temporarily, but
because our media is lousy.